The body of a man is found slumped outside his Brussels apartment. 5 gunshots. No witnesses. No signs of struggle. The victim, Gerald Bull, a brilliant Canadian engineer once hailed as a visionary of space science, now at the center of one of the most secretive weapons projects the world had never officially heard of. And just like that, the mastermind behind Saddam Hussein's so-called supergun was gone.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
No arrests. No suspects. But everyone in intelligence circles already knew what happened. Mossad got to him. And they didn't just end a man, they shut down a ticking time bomb pointed straight at Israel. This is the story of how one man's ambition collided with the red lines of global security, and how a covert international operation quietly crushed a nightmare before it could take shape. Gerald Bull was no ordinary weapons scientist. By the time most engineers were earning tenure, he was already making headlines with breakthrough research in long-range artillery. His work during the High-Altitude Research Project pushed the limits of what guns could do, not in war, but for space. He believed artillery could launch satellites. Not missiles. Guns. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Bull was a man obsessed with scale and distance. If he could shoot a shell higher, faster, farther than anyone else, he would. Governments noticed. Militaries got interested. But the problem with genius, it doesn't always care who's writing the checks. When funding dried up and political winds shifted, Bull drifted into more controversial waters. He worked with apartheid-era South Africa. He sold to regimes the West wasn't exactly friendly with. And when Iraq came calling under Saddam Hussein, Bull saw opportunity, not a red flag. That's when Project Babylon began. On the surface, it looked like harmless engineering work: industrial components, metal tubes, manufacturing contracts scattered across Europe. But underneath it was a sprawling, disguised operation to build a massive artillery weapon. Not a missile. A gun. A supergun that, if completed, could theoretically lob projectiles into orbit or rain destruction on targets hundreds of miles away. And Saddam had one target in mind: Israel. Bull wasn't stupid. He knew this had to stay under the radar. So he built a tangled web of front companies. Fake contracts. Innocent-sounding shipping manifests. Custom hydraulic systems, enormous barrel segments, recoil mechanisms, all ordered from different countries, routed through different hands, each piece looking just harmless enough to avoid scrutiny. The kind of gray zone where dual-use technology thrives. But Mossad had been watching Bull for years. Ever since his South African deals, he was on their radar. When he got cozy with Iraq, their interest turned into full-scale surveillance. Israeli intelligence picked up on the shipping routes, the payments, the cryptic corporate ties. They weren't alone. British Customs started intercepting parts. American agencies were quietly feeding data. What Bull thought was a stealth operation was already under a microscope. The tipping point came in March 1990, when British officials seized a set of pipes at the port of Teesport. They weren't just any pipes, they were segments of Bull's supergun barrel, each one massive enough to raise eyebrows on its own. With that, the project was exposed. The illusion collapsed. Suddenly, governments scrambled to trace every part of this clandestine machine. Across Europe, shipments were stopped. Contracts were cancelled. Arms control laws were dusted off and enforced with sudden clarity. Bull's network, so carefully built, was dismantled in weeks. And yet, despite all that exposure, the weapon was never completed. The barrels were never assembled. The gun was never fired. Then came the final act. On March 22, 1990, just days after those gun parts were seized in Britain, Gerald Bull was found dead in Brussels. Shot 5 times with a silenced weapon. Whoever did it got in and out without a trace. Belgian authorities opened a case, but no one expected justice. The message had already been delivered. Mossad never claimed responsibility. They never needed to. The implication was loud and clear: if you build weapons for regimes that threaten Israeli security, you don't get a warning. You get stopped. Permanently. To intelligence insiders, the assassination was strategic. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention. Killing Bull didn't just stop Project Babylon. It scared off the next Bull, and the one after that. Because even if Iraq had somehow salvaged the project without him, they had lost the mind behind the machine. And without Bull, the blueprints were just scrap metal. In the aftermath, the Gulf War confirmed what many had suspected. Iraq's military ambitions were real, but often impractical. Project Babylon, in particular, might have looked terrifying on paper, but in reality, it was flawed. Immobile. Vulnerable. A sitting duck for airstrikes. In the end, the supergun was more symbolic than strategic, a technological flex that never delivered. But that doesn't mean it wasn't dangerous. That's what made Bull so threatening. His ideas worked. He had the rare ability to turn theory into engineering. That's why Mossad didn't wait for a missile launch or a test firing. They acted when the project was still on the ground, still theoretical. Because the risk wasn't just the gun itself. It was the man who could build it. Bull's death also reignited a bitter debate: how far should intelligence agencies go to prevent future threats? Is a targeted killing justified if it saves lives down the road? Does legality matter when national survival is on the line? It's not a new question, but Bull's case made it feel modern. It showed the world how fragile the line is between innovation and destruction. One moment, you're working on satellite launch technology; the next, you're enabling a rogue regime to strike its enemies from hundreds of miles away. And it wasn't just about Bull. His assassination marked a turning point in how states handle proliferation. It wasn't enough to seize cargo or block trade. The threat wasn't the metal, it was the mind. The message was clear: if you're smart enough to build weapons for the wrong people, you're dangerous enough to disappear. In the years that followed, Project Babylon became a cautionary tale for engineers, intelligence officers, and policymakers alike. Export controls got tighter. Dual-use technology became a global concern. Governments started paying closer attention to what was being shipped, and who was building what for whom. And Bull's legacy complicated. Some still see him as a misunderstood genius who got too close to fire. Others view him as reckless, even traitorous, a man who sold brilliance to the highest bidder without thinking about the consequences. One thing is certain: he changed the game. Not because his weapon worked, but because he proved it could. The story of Gerald Bull isn't just about one man or one gun. It's about how innovation, ambition, and geopolitics can spiral into something deadly when boundaries blur. It's a reminder that in the shadow wars waged far from public view, there are no press releases, no trials, no apologies. Just actions and the silence that follows. If you're into stories like this where genius, secrecy, and international espionage collide, hit that like button and subscribe. And if you've got thoughts on whether assassinations like Bull's are justified or crossing the line, drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. You know what's wild? Gerald Bull didn't even need to be in Iraq. He wasn't coerced. He wasn't duped. He walked in willingly, fully aware of who Saddam Hussein was and what the regime stood for. For a guy who once dreamed of launching satellites for science, Bull's turn toward military-grade artillery for a brutal dictatorship wasn't just a career shift, it was a moral detour off a cliff. But here's the thing, Bull didn't think like a politician or a soldier. He thought like an engineer. If something could be built, it should be built. The consequences someone else's department. That disconnect, that belief that science exists in a vacuum, was his fatal flaw. And Saddam, he knew exactly what he had. A scientific savant with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. For Iraq, Project Babylon wasn't just about practical warfare, it was psychological warfare. The idea that Iraq could build a weapon that could hit Tel Aviv from Baghdad, that alone was a message. Whether it worked didn't matter as much as the fear it created. And Bull played right into it. Now, here's where things get even murkier. A lot of people don't realize how close this whole operation came to actually happening. We're talking about massive gun barrels, some over 150 feet long, precision engineered to fire shells the size of cars. These weren't prototypes, these were real parts being fabricated and shipped. This thing was in motion. Until it wasn't. Because while Bull was obsessing over metallurgy and trajectory angles, Mossad was playing a whole different game. Israel's intelligence agency didn't just sit around waiting for the supergun to be fired. They knew that by the time you're reacting to the weapon, you're already too late. So they moved early. Surgical. Precise. No explosions. No military raids. Just quiet surveillance, tight cooperation with European agencies, and then the strike. British customs intercepted components. Intelligence traced shipping routes. And when the pieces stopped arriving in Iraq, the puzzle stopped taking shape. Iraq never even got the chance to assemble it. The weapon died in shipping containers and warehouses. And once Bull was gone, so was the only person who could put it all back together. Let's be clear, this wasn't some overreaction. Bull wasn't building toy rockets. He was engineering something that could destabilize an entire region. And given Iraq's known ambitions at the time, including their obsession with hitting Israel, Mossad saw this as an existential threat. They weren't trying to make a statement. They were trying to erase a threat before it materialized. And they did. The thing that really gets under your skin, though, is how easily this all flew under the radar until it didn't. The world only found out about Project Babylon after the pieces were already being stopped. After Bull was already dead. That's how deep the deception ran. The entire operation was cloaked in so many layers of corporate smoke screens and legitimate-sounding contracts, even experts missed it. It's a case study in how dual-use technology, stuff that can be used for peaceful or military purposes, can slip through the cracks. A steel barrel, sure, that could be for a mining operation. Hydraulic systems may be for construction. But line them up just right and suddenly you've got the bones of a weapon no one authorized. Bull knew this. He played the game like a pro. And it worked until it didn't. What's even more sobering is how many countries were, at least indirectly, part of the supply chain. The UK, Germany, Switzerland, even the US. Most of them weren't complicit, they were just unaware. That's how dangerous the gray zone is. When the paperwork looks fine and the buyer seems clean, it's easy to miss what the parts are really for. So when the international crackdown came, it wasn't just about stopping Iraq. It was about stopping everyone else from even trying. That's part of what makes the Gerald Bull story so chilling. It wasn't just a one-off plot. It was a blueprint. A proof of concept. And when you kill the blueprint, you kill the threat not just for now, but for years. After the Gulf War, when coalition forces went through Iraq's military infrastructure, they confirmed the suspicions. Project Babylon never got off the ground. Literally, but they found the parts. They found the plans. The ambition was real. The engineering was sound. What stopped it wasn't war, it was espionage. And that leads to the unspoken reality of how international security works. There are the battles you see and then the ones you don't. The assassinations. The intercepted shipments. The back-channel warnings. The quiet, cold decisions made behind closed doors. Decisions like, Gerald Bull cannot be allowed to live. Was it legal? Probably not. Was it moral? Depends on who you ask. Was it effective? Absolutely. Some say Bull's assassination crossed a line. That targeted killings without trial set a dangerous precedent. And they're not wrong to ask that. But others argue, what's the cost of doing nothing if a man is building a superweapon for a hostile regime? Do you wait for the first shot or do you stop him before that happens, even if it means becoming judge, jury, and executioner? Mossad made their choice. They gambled that killing one man would save thousands. Maybe more. And history suggests they weren't wrong. It also sent a clear signal to the global weapons community: if you're planning something that threatens Israel or anyone's national security, your contracts won't save you. Your PhDs won't save you. Even being in the heart of Europe won't save you. You won't see them coming. And you won't get a second chance. Gerald Bull's story doesn't have a clean moral arc. It's not a tale of good versus evil. It's about how science, when unchecked by ethics, becomes dangerous. And how nations respond when diplomacy isn't fast enough. His murder was never solved. But nobody really needed it to be. The message was received. Today, Project Babylon is a footnote in military history, an unfinished dream buried under decades of classified documents and geopolitical chess. But its impact still echoes. It shaped how we look at weapons proliferation. It changed how intelligence agencies deal with rogue scientists. And it reminded the world that the biggest threats aren't always standing armies or missile silos. Sometimes, it's one brilliant man with a ranch, a contract, and no conscience. So next time you hear about an engineer working for a regime with something to prove, don't underestimate it. Because behind every breakthrough, there's a choice: build something that lifts us up or something that can blow everything apart. Gerald Bull made his choice. And someone else made sure he couldn't make another. There's one last thing that sticks with you about the Gerald Bull saga, and it's not just the engineering marvel, or the silent efficiency of his assassination. It's the quiet discomfort that settles in when you realize, this was all very real. This wasn't a movie plot. It wasn't a Cold War-era rumor or a spy novel fantasy. It was one of the most ambitious military projects in modern history, and it was inches away from becoming operational. Right under the noses of world powers, and it took a coordinated, multinational intelligence dragnet and a bullet-riddled corpse to shut it down. That's the part most people forget. This wasn't just Mossad acting alone in some rogue, cinematic takedown. European intelligence agencies were involved. The US had eyes on it. The British played a direct role in intercepting parts. Everybody knew what was happening, and everyone had something to lose if Iraq succeeded. Bull's project didn't just threaten Israel. It threatened the idea of international weapons control. Because if one man could game the system, dodge export laws, outsmart customs, and manipulate manufacturers, then the whole structure of global non-proliferation was, frankly, toast. And that's exactly what Project Babylon exposed, how terrifyingly fragile that system is. Think about it. Bull wasn't he buying nukes or missiles. He was buying pipes, metal castings, machining equipment, things you can't just ban or track easily. That's what made the whole operation so slippery. If you slap a missile ban on a country, they'll just build a gun big enough to fire a missile-sized shell instead. It's arms control whack-a-mole. And that's what makes Gerald Bull so dangerous in hindsight. He didn't violate the rules, he worked around them. His brilliance wasn't just technical, it was bureaucratic. He knew where the blind spots were. He exploited them like a pro. And he did it with a smile, because in his mind, he was just solving an engineering problem. But the world doesn't run on engineering problems, it runs on consequences. And the consequence of Bull's work was terrifying. If Project Babylon had succeeded, it wouldn't have stopped with Iraq. Other regimes would be lined up. Bull would become the go-to weapons architect for any country that wanted long-range dominance without the cost or stigma of ballistic missiles. His supergun could reshaped warfare. It could redefined deterrence. And it would made arms treaties obsolete overnight. That's the real reason he had to go. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about silencing a man who might build a weapon. It was about silencing a mind that could unlock a loophole in global security no one was prepared to close. So Mossad pulled the trigger. And the world moved on. But here's the uncomfortable truth, if Gerald Bull hadn't been killed, there's a good chance you'd know his name today not as a casualty, but as a legend. The man who redefined warfare. The father of orbital artillery. A controversial icon. He was that close. Instead, he became a warning shot. To engineers who get too close to the edge. To governments who think gray areas are safe. To regimes who think ambition beats oversight. The story of Project Babylon isn't just about one supergun or one scientist. It's about what happens when brilliant minds go unchecked, when national interests override international law, and when quiet decisions in back rooms ripple through history louder than any explosion ever could. So yeah, Gerald Bull was erased. Not by chance. Not by mystery. By design. And maybe, that's what saved us. If you want more stories like this, covered chaos, shadowy decisions, and the behind-the-scenes meltdowns that almost changed the world, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, is the world safer without minds like Bull, or weaker for silencing them? Let us get into it.